It's white to play in this position. Can you guess Korchnoi's beautiful plan that achieved a winning position? We keep talking about Master's great ability of going for the correct piece trades to achieve endgames, which they know the evaluations. This is one such position. It's so lovely, it's so beautiful. You will love it too. I'm sure about this, folks. First things first, observe the situation. Please, the orientation phase. Look at the pawn structure, folks. I'm seeing double pawns on the king side for black. White has a healthy majority, plus white has a protected passed pawn on e5. Okay? These are my observations. Black has 3 versus 2 on the queen side, but right now they cannot really move that easily because my pieces control the c4 square. What else are you seeing? The knight on b7. Fianchetto knights are usually terrible in chess, and this is not an exception. There are many different ways to play this position with white, but Korchnoi goes for a forcing line and achieves a winning endgame. But before I show you that, I will also show you some alternatives that might not be so good for white. Maybe some of you thought we should rush and push the pass pawn to e6. The problem is, after rook e7, you awakened that knight on b7. It's now coming to d6. It will cause some damage to your position. Besides, it's not so easy at all to roll the pawn to promotion in this case. Best move is maybe king e2, knight d6, and definitely black improved in the last 2 moves. I also accept your answer if you solve the square c4 and you came up with a plan of knight d2 to c4 check. That's a beautiful, lovely plan as well for white. That's also strong. The only problem seems to be you invite knight d4 move. That knight also sits on the outpost while hitting your bishop, but everything is very forcing. This comes with a check in this position. You might have also noticed the c4 square and thus came up with a plan of knight d2. That's also a good move, by the way, folks. The only drawback is you invite the move knight d4, and that knight also sits on this beautiful d4 outpost. After knight c4 check, if they drop back to c7, then yes, we have this little idea of grabbing a pawn with this check. That's also good for white. But they can also choose to go to a6 in this position to stop you from winning a pawn. And here, the best move for white is the exchange sacrifice, takes, and now the king has improved. That knight is terrible, the passed pawn is quite powerful, and white achieves a winning position. But this involves real calculation. Don't you think this involves some nice judgment, maybe some risk taking? Korchnoi did not want to deal with any of this in the actual game. Now comes my question again. Can you please stop the video and guess Korchnoi's plan from this position? He has an end state in mind, folks. He wants to reach a knight endgame from this position, and you're a great player if you found the entire plan of takes. After takes, he also exchanges off those rooks, folks. This was his vision from the first position. Why did he choose to go for this line? Now, please observe white's main goal in winning this position. The next move is also the key, by the way, and the move is king d3. The king is now entering the c4 square, and Korchnoi transitioned to a knight endgame with a much better pawn structure, protected passed pawn on e5, and he will also have a much better king in the process. That knight is a terrible piece, tied down in guarding their weaknesses, and Korchnoi believes, correctly so, that this gives white a winning advantage in itself. Botvinnik says knight endgames are pawn endgames, and Korchnoi is proving us why that's the case. After king d3, folks, if they go c6 directly, then you play king c4. Zugzwang is on the board. Please focus. Zugzwang is the sharpest endgame weapon. Look at this. The knight is tied down in guarding those weaknesses. We are attacking those targets with our knights, and even our king is shouldering away the black king. If the black king chooses to go to b6, then you invade with king d5 and the game is over. So after king c4, full zugzwang. Black has no moves left, and white will grab one of these pawns with a winning advantage. That's why after king d3, black chose to play king c7, because he anticipates king c4 and he wants to play king c6 themselves. So now black's claim is very simple. What is your winning plan? Because you have to make a move, right? You have to make a move as white to win this position. And here, many players would blunder as white. They would impulsively rush and roll their pawn to e6, comes my question. Please, can you please blunder check the move e6, folks? That's a beautiful blunder check puzzle, folks. The pawn move unprotects the d6 square and invites knight d6 check. You're not even finished because king d3 is the only move, and you set yourself for a pawn fork with c4 to follow, and the knight is lost. Incredible slip and a big blunder. We have to put double question mark to this move because white spoils a winning position to a complete disaster. After c4, the game is over. Notice that only 3-ply calculation. This doesn't require deep calculation. The question is, as a result of my next move, am I allowing a devastating check? What are all the things my move undoes? What was the pawn doing before but not anymore? That's a question. What am I unprotecting if I make this move? If you ask yourself this question, you can reduce most of the blunders. Pawns cannot go backward, so you must be careful about the square d6 that you're giving away for that knight before pushing the pawn. Of course, Korchnoi is a great player. He doesn't fall for such tricks. And comes my question. Please stop the video, folks. You can do it. Formulate a winning plan for white. It looks like you are in an impasse. You cannot make a pawn move. You don't want to retreat your king because you invite king d5. And if you remove the knight from there, it looks like this knight also gains freedom, no? Okay, please find the only winning plan for white. There's only one idea that wins the game for white. Folks, you're a great player if you start with the move knight c1. That's the only winning plan. Why? Because that knight is going to d3 on the next turn to keep tying down the enemy knight, while also you're giving yourself one little spare tempo with the push b3, and that tempo will be a game-winning tempo. We will soon see how it works. Well, black has no king move left because you invade on d5 otherwise. Knight d6 doesn't work, so knight retreat is a must. But then comes a beautiful move knight d3, simply putting pressure on that weakness, thus tying down the black knight on this e6 square. Now it looks like everything is the same. What has changed, right? You're still sort of an impasse. You have no pawn moves left. Besides, you just gave yourself this little pawn move b3, and white achieves zugzwang with a winning position. You just gave the move to black, and notice black has no moves left. Because if you make a knight move, then you take on c5 with a winning position. If you make a king move, then the king invades via d5. That's why zugzwang is the sharpest endgame weapon in chess, and Korchnoi has seen all this from this position, by the way. Look at his genius. Takes, everything is forced. Takes, everything is forced. This is also forced. And he must have seen knight c1 followed by knight d3 followed by b3 resource. Black has no moves left. In the actual game, he tried g5, and comes my final question. Do you take this way or this way? One move is much more technical than the other one. And you're a great player again, folks. If you want to move f takes g5, you simply create this f4 square for your knight. You anticipate g6 because that's the only way for black to give the move to you. And now Korchnoi's move, of course, is knight f4, and black resigned here because, again, your problems remain. I attack your knight, I attack your pawn. If the knight moves, then I grab the pawn on g6. If you take on f4, this leaves me with a completely winning position. Extra pawn plus invasion on d5 to follow. For example, king b6, king d5, and this game is completely finished. So after knight f4, black just resigned. Knight f8 is the only try to guard g6, but here any move wins. You can even play the move knight d5, for example. Very easy to understand all these ideas. But even e6 and e7 will follow, and this game is finished. For example, you can look at this line. You can just roll the pawn and win on c5 and win all these pawns on the queen side, and the game is completely finished. Just notice the Grandmaster's vision. He has end states in mind. He knows so many chess chunks stored in his long-term memory, so he knows exactly which position to reverse engineer his way into. Korchnoi was a great calculator. He was a great concrete chess player. I'm sure he has calculated all the branches properly before entering this line. Of course, you can even take on d3. Nothing changes. King c4, zugzwang ensues. That's a pure zugzwang, actually. That's a better version for white, because now, you see, you can't even give the move to me right now. King b6, king d5. Again, zugzwang. Pawn move, I just take. Knight move, I take on c5. There is nothing going on in black's favor. The game is completely finished. So he anticipates this sequence, which is very forcing. And that's also why, exchanges are so powerful sometimes, because by this exchange, actually series of exchanges, white doesn't give any chance to black. Black has to oblige and enter into this lost endgame. And that's why Botvinnik says knight endgames are pawn endgames. Almost all the nuances that work in a pawn endgame also holds in a knight endgame in chess. What are those? Well, the importance of a protected passed pawn, right? That's usually a huge advantage in a pure pawn endgame. The same in a knight endgame. Pawn structure, right? Double pawns are not really great in pawn endgames. The same in knight endgames. King's activity. The white king is much more active than the black king. That also helps in a knight endgame. And even, you might say, I have an attacking knight and you have a defensive knight. That's obviously also is in white's favor. So if you combine all these imbalances, then you reach to the conclusion that white is winning. But of course, you know it's winning, but how do you win? You see how a grandmaster is forming a plan. Knight c1 to d3 is the only winning plan, in fact, for white in this position. Black has no other moves but to oblige. If you go to b7 again, nothing changes. You still play b3. It's black to play. Black has no moves left because that knight is frozen on that pawn and the king is frozen in stopping king d5 invasions. If you play king b6, king d5, this game is completely finished. If the knight moves, then you take on c5 with a completely winning position. In fact, Stockfish approves Korchnoi's idea of bishop takes c6. This is clearly the best and the winning continuation for white. But you see, Grandmaster's vision. I'm much more about to show you what kind of things the Grandmaster knows, and knowledge is a huge advantage in chess. Those patterns and chunks stored in your long-term memories gives access to you to find those resources because you have some end states that you already know. But also, in some sense, it's the most technical because you don't give any counterplay to the opponent. The counterplay is totally taken away from your opponent with this line. So this must be calculated first in terms of systematicity of chess calculation, right? We should always give more weight to such forcing lines first, because if it's winning for us, like in this case, then you don't need to deal with anything else in some sense. The other things was, of course, knight c4 plan, right? Now we can compare and contrast these two ideas. That's also powerful for white because of knight c4 ideas. But you see, you're giving black ideas. For example, knight d4 is one idea. This can become a mess. It can go to c7 to sacrifice on a7. Sometimes they can go to a6. This line involves more calculation. By the way, e6 also is winning for white. It looks like you're dropping the bishop, and then comes a beautiful e7 resource. And white is still winning because the rook cannot stop the pawn. Notice that, guys. Beautiful chess pattern as well. Knight d6, I just take, of course. Nothing changes, and I just promote. But you see, all these lines are also winning for white, but this requires deeper calculation. A single slip can change the entire evaluation as well. That's why I call these the art of exchanging pieces. By trading of the right pieces, Grandmaster Korchnoi achieves a winning position in a simpler setting. The opponent has zero counterplay left. That's why I consider putting this position in my workbook for the art of series. Art of exchanging pieces, awakening pieces, burying pieces, and multi-purpose moves. I compile a mixed set of puzzles combining all these four arts. It will be your homework position, folks. Schmidt versus Kasparov, 1986. Black to play. Please formulate a good plan for black in this position. How would you treat this endgame? Okay? Kasparov with the black pieces. The knight is guarded by the rook. There's also some pressure on a5. Black to play. What is the correct solution for black in this position? Given what you learned so far in this episode, some idea should appear to your mind naturally from this position. Okay? Expecting your feedback. Please give me a like and subscribe. If you like the video, I give feedback to each and every one of you on these homework positions. We are here to appreciate the true beauty of this game while also deeply engaging with material, asking those why questions, and improving and learning beautiful chess chunks. See you soon.